couldn't call their fucking backup because their radios weren't working. They actually had to get people to call 911. If that's the police, where the fuck is the money going?
Yeah.
If this is the kind of policing that is happening in this moment of emergency where people are supposed to rely on this institution of the police for safety, they can't even call for backup. They can't call to report that this is going on and had to rely on the people to essentially report that this shooting had taken place. Right.
Didn't
So,
didn't they say they had like undetonated devices, something like that? I don't know.
well, again, we don't really know because people are reporting rumors, people are reporting hearsay and not really understanding what's going on. We know 18 people were shot, but that's as much actual concrete information that we have. But because the level of incompetence that the policing system functions under is never actually scrutinized, that we continue to fund them, that we continue to double their funding. Like here in LA, Sheriff Villanueva is constantly asking for more money. For what? If what is it that you're going to spend it? Well, we need more police officers. Why do we need police officers? Well, rising crimes. When in reality, LA has been seeing a steady decline in crime over the last 30 years. Right?
Wow.
So how do we consistently feed this? Well, we buy into the narrative. We buy into the stories that we watch on the news, right? I mean, you look at LA is going under an election for a new mayor. Rick Caruso is running under the idea that LA is a violent city, right? How do you fuel that narrative? Well, it just happens to coincidentally be that one of his best friends owns the LA Times. And they're
Mm.
running these stories of really fueling the idea that crime continues to exist or it's rising in LA, right? When in reality, there is crime, but that's the nature of a city in capitalism and the lack of resources available to people, the fact that we are still in a pandemic that is negatively affecting the economic outcomes and economic outlook of people.
Mhm. Which, oh, Anita, do you have a question?
No, I was just gonna. I don't know if Joe Buscaino is still running for mayor.
I
But
haven't seen his ads, so I'm assuming
yeah,
no, but it might be.
I haven't seen his ads either. But he's from like my town and stuff, and
Mhm,
he was also an ex-cop.
mhm.
Was once Republican turned Democrat, and
Right.
now he's like criminalizing like homelessness and all that
Mhm.
stuff. So it's just like this kind of like ripple effect of like individuals who are trying to represent that are connected to the police and LAPD in some way. So I just wanted
Yeah.
to add that. I was like, that's two people right there.
Right. And you start looking at like all of the other people. I forget his name. There's a billboard of him down the street from my house, and it's like just a QR code. And you look him up, and he's one of these like real estate dudes who is really into crypto, which is its own problem on its own, right? And the fact that like it's environmentally disastrous to function off of cryptocurrency. But he is again like real estate people really need to push the idea that crime is a problem so that property values go up, and in certain places and property values go down. Like the nature of capitalism is that only a few people can actually benefit from this kind of wealth accumulation,
Right.
and real estate is the only way to actually do that properly here in LA.
This is very complex.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like you said, it's not black and white. It's like that whole gray space. And there's a lot to tap into when we're talking about this because you can't talk about one thing without explaining the other.
Right.
And then it's just like we're all everywhere, right? But, like policing, like it's not the answer to our communities, but it's the answer to like the whole elitist and capitalist. A lot of people think that in some way like, oh, we're protecting people, and that's not the case. It doesn't solve the whatever problems that we may have within our society and stuff like that. So yeah, like go ahead.
I have a question.
I think that's like a really good perspective to look at it from, right? Like the idea of protection, because we go back to what we were talking about at the beginning with like the Enclosure Acts, the whole concept of this new way of policing was about protecting private property, right?
Mm-hmm.
You look at the LAPD cars, it says to protect and serve, but you have to ask yourselves, what are they protecting? Who are they serving, right?
Mhm.
And so if we are pushing for, the ending of policing as we understand it, that's something that not everyone is going to get on board with, right? There are plenty of people, both black, white, brown, etc., who may be against the violence that police are engaging in, which is a monopoly of violence that they have, right? We can't attack them, but they can attack us. But there are still people who believe that that's the only thing that will protect my home from the actual crime that is happening outside. Because whether we want to consider that perspective, like there is crime that is happening outside. Not that all of it is, gonna hurt me, but people for the most part in this country live in a state of fear constantly. And whether or not that's constantly being fed to us is a whole different argument, which I pretty much would think that it is, but we also have to get to a point where we can engage in like community with each other and overcome a lot of the problems that we have within our own communities, with our neighboring communities, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Because a good example of how we can defeat the over policing of our neighborhoods is what happens during the 1992 uprising. That while people are quote unquote rioting, the Watts gangs come together and call a peace treaty, right? The Bloods and the Crips come together and they call a peace treaty on their own, right? And since that moment, we do see a sharp decline in crime throughout LA City and by extension LA County, right? And all of this happens because the police essentially killed this kid. I can't remember his first name, but his last name was Pico. They essentially kill him execution style, meaning they have him on his knees and they shoot him in the back of the head. And they find the gangs find his body and they realize the police killed him because the police are bragging about this over the radios, right? And we eventually have evidence of this. And because it's the riots, though, people are kind of scattered in their way of thinking. But the gangs realize, hold on, what is happening that even the police are getting away with killing us? And so they come together with community leaders, with people like Jim Brown, who is a very complicated figure in American history. He's the former football player, one of the first major black athletes of the modern era, but also very susceptible to domestic violence. Like, there's a story of him throwing his partner out of a window, right? But this is a dude who, brings a lot of good to the black communities, but also, a domestic abuser, right? Very controversial figure, very complicated person. But he comes and he brings the gangs together and he was like, let's figure this out. And they essentially literally write a peace treaty. Like, they take the 1947 peace treaty between Israel and Egypt and they reword it in a way that creates peace in LA. And what you see is drive-by shootings go down, random acts of violence go on. Yeah, crime is still happening. They're still engaging in the drug trade and they still are, at war with each other, but it's a more sensible war, I guess is the right case. And that's the power that we can use, right? That as community members, that we can come together and actually engage in an alternative to policing as we know it, right? That the community itself can come together and essentially say, we can fix this for ourselves. But again, when do we have the time to do that, right? Because capitalism's requirements is that we give 40 hours of our bodies to them. We have to sleep, we have to live. Right. It's hard, right? And not all of us are cut out for a meeting, right? I can't go to meetings anymore. I just don't have the mental capacity to sit there in a meeting and just have a constant argument and get anything done. And not that all meetings are like that, but a lot of people look at it that way. So where is the leadership going to come from? And it has to come from y'all.
I want to just kind of go back a little bit when you were talking about training. And I remember when the uprise of Colin Kaepernick was rising, when he had taken a knee, they were talking about police training and said that it takes a barber or a hairstylist longer, just to hold a brush than it does for a police
Mhm.
to, the just equating the training. There are a lot of people in specifically, like at least in my circle, friends, coworkers, whomever, that have argued that they fight really hard for the good cops, and say, what about them? They're people too, and try and humanize, or at least I would say dismiss everything else that's going on in regards to violence, but specifically folks who argue, well, we just need more people of color to
Mhm.
join the police force, and that will solve the race issue. What would you say to them?
Um, I get what they're saying. Like, I get the idea that people want to believe in the concept of a good cop because, again, the whole institution of policing has been sold to us as safety, right? I would like to be safe in my neighborhood, right? The old neighborhood that I used to live in, like, I used to walk around with like a baton just in case because I used to get stepped to all the time, and it was one of those things where it's like I could laugh it off or just joke around with those kids, but you never know, right? And so I needed to protect myself and never had to actually use it, but now, I don't want to live in that situation again. And safety is the first thing that comes to people's mind when they want to live because we should have the right to safety. The problem is saying that we have to consider the good cops. And not to be dismissive of it, but where are they when the bad cops do something, right? The entire institution of policing doesn't really give space to good cops to actually do anything about it because, I mean, it it is a gang or a fraternity, right? You have to be loyal to them first because whether you want to look at it positively or negatively, the way that they look at the world is that they are that blue line that we talked about earlier, that Parker said. And they have to fight with each other against, barbarism. And losing your partner's trust is a death sentence for a lot of those police officers. So, but the problem is, like, if you really are advocating for the good cop, where are they when the bad cops do something? Because is silence equating guilt, right? If we see a crime happen in front of us and we say, like, and I don't mean like someone's shoplifting, right? Like, whatever, right? But if we see someone being abused in front of us and we don't say anything, are we complicit in that abuse? And, everyone's moral compass is different. Mine would be that, yeah, you are complicit in that abuse if you stay silent when you see that abuse happening in front of you. So if we are going to defend the good cops, what have those good cops done to earn our trust, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because we constantly see this happening, right? And and the thing is, it's like even when they do try to do something, like we're gonna see it with suspicion, right? Um, it's like the abusive partner who like beats you and then brings you roses saying it was your fault, right? And
Mm-hmm.
that's what we end up seeing with police. It's like, yeah, we'll kneel with you, but you better disperse in the next 5 minutes, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, what actually is the good cop doing, right? Of course, we want to believe that there are good cops because we want to, as humans, we generally do want to believe that people are good, right? And I mean, we see it all the time. We saw it like at the beginning of the pandemic. We saw how people were helping each other, even if the media was constantly telling us, well, like people in the fucking grocery stores are,
Savage.
going after each other.
Yeah.
We really did see people come together as best as we could for like a month, right? And then, and then we discovered that COVID was affecting Black people more than everyone, and everyone said, no, 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 everything's fine, right? Because again, if it affects Black people more, then no one's really going to care, right? And so, where are those good cops, right? When we need them. So, if you want to believe that there are good cops, that's great. I mean, I could understand why you want to believe in that, but where are they when the bad cops are doing these things, and why don't they stand up? And you have to realize they can't stand up because the whole system is designed against them. The whole system is designed to maintain silence. The whole system is designed to maintain the authority and the power of the police, regardless